Hi, this is Jim Jalamas from Brooklyn, New York,
This is JB Miller in London.
and you're listening to Boomer Has It. Hello, everyone. You might or might not know that King Charles, the one from England, will be visiting the US this week, just as the UK commemorates the centenary of their beloved late Queen. Today, we'll discuss whether Liz, the late Queen, was actually a complete washout. She was a symbol of unity and pride over 70 years during her reign, REIGN. But she left behind what? A dysfunctional family that set off time bombs that damaged the monarchy. JB's a longtime UK resident and a sometime royalist, and he'll explain this predicament in his words. I'll do my best to keep up, but mostly as an American, as a colonial, I'll probably be a little more passive in the show, just lying back and thinking of England.
That's a great introduction. Yeah, I think I've lived in England long enough to, like a lot of Brits. I grew up with the Queen, and she was Queen for 70 years. She just passed her 70th. Um, as in, the celebrations. She's longest serving monarch in British history. So like everyone else, I couldn't imagine the world or the country without her. It just, even though she was 96, and her husband had died a couple of years before at 99, and her mother lived to be 101, there was longevity in that family. But we thought it was maybe more than longevity. We thought she would live forever, and of course she didn't. And it means that the new king was quite an old geezer by the time he reached the throne. I think he was 73 when he took over a few years ago.
How old is Charles
So
now? So he must be
he's like 75.
76.
I think.
Oh, 75.
Yeah, he's got his senior rail pass. He's had it for some years, and
Can,
um,
may I just jump in quickly to say
yeah,
I have no relationship to the monarchy. It just seems ridiculous to me. Maybe it's being an American with all our independent mindedness, but the idea of someone with or who is descended from someone with absolute rule is kind of sickening to me. And
well, she doesn't have absolute rule. She's
once
mostly a
once her
figurehead.
ancestors did, her
Yes,
ancestors
that's
that
true.
the
That's true.
the
Okay.
tradition of it, I understand. And
Yeah.
to your point, bringing it to the president to be a symbolic monarch seems like an awful big waste of freaking money. That said, during the George Floyd years, when I was a Bank of America employee, they reached out to, sorry, this was the pandemic overlapping with George Floyd. They reached out to all the employees who were sequestered at home and brought in a number of guests. One of them was Prince Charles,
Mm.
Prince, to talk about the environment. And I can't say I was so impressed. He was so charming and engaging. He, our CEO, so interesting contrast in sort of secular rule. Our CEO referred to him as Your Majesty, and His Majesty referred to our CEO as Brian, but they were really engaged, and it took me by surprise. So there you have it. I know
Mhm.
nothing. How
Uh,
how do the Brits? How do British people think of the Queen?
well, first of all, before we get any complaints, he wouldn't have been referred to as His Majesty. He would have been referred to as His Royal Highness because he
Oh, he
wasn't a
did. Yeah,
king
he
yet.
did do that. What's the difference
And yes,
anyway?
his
Don't answer.
nickname, Private Eye magazine, which is very popular here. It's a bit like it's a satirical magazine that inspired um, New York's what was the 1980s satirical magazine we all
Bye.
like. Spy, yeah, inspired Spy magazine. So
Nice
they
boomer reference.
they developed nicknames for the members of the royal family, and Queen Elizabeth was Brenda, and Prince Charles was Brian, and Princess Diana was was Cheryl,
Why
and
did they
Qu-
make different names? Why didn't they
and
just call him Chucky?
Camilla was Lorraine, to try to make them put them in perspective as if they're just a normal family living in a two up, two down, house somewhere, flat, in the Greater London area. Brenda, Brian, Cheryl, and Lorraine.
That
They're
goes
our
right
royal
over my head,
family.
but please continue. What can
um,
I say? I'm an ugly American, and
no,
yet
but
I'm
you're
open-minded.
like a lot of Americans, you watched The Crown, and I think that has put the royal family in a sort of cinematic context because Peter Morgan, who created and wrote that series, rounded off a lot of edges and had to squeeze events into certain time frames to make them work on a structural level. But I think a lot of Americans know a lot more about the royal family or have a perspective or sense of the royal family than they would have done, 10 or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I can't remember when The Crown began. So, it is of interest to American audience. And I will remind people, because I think a lot of our viewers and listeners, like you, went on the No Kings marches. There was the third one just a few weeks ago. And I will point out that there was a huge No Kings march here in London, which was, of course, slightly ironic because we have a king. And so, the the questions you asked a couple minutes ago about, why do we need a figurehead and isn't it a big cost? A lot of British asked that very same question. And we've had spoken in a previous pod about the um, Andrew, who used to be Prince, scandal. And just after Andrew was arrested, this was a couple months ago, there was a poll taken, and only 45% of Britons prefer to have a monarch over an elected head of state. Because of course the Queen was, and the King is the head of state. We have a prime minister who's our elected leader, but he's not the head of state. In America, it's both the elected leader is both the leader of the country and the head of state. So we divide that job between the two. I mean,
So
that's
if we
two
had a
person's
king,
job.
if the U.S. had a king, maybe we can make an analogy here. Let's say I don't know, Joe Rogan became king, and Trump
Okay.
would be president, and how would they divide responsibilities?
Well, I mean, I don't know how they would decide to. You can ask
I'm
how
saying the
British.
equivalent. What would be how do
Yeah,
we
I do.
transfer that
Okay. Well, I
equivalency?
mean, the the
I'm
monarch
not
is
asking
not.
you to call up Joe Rogan or Trump.
I've got his number here, but we'll have to call him afterward. Um, the 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 monarch is supposed to have no public political views. We were not supposed to know where the Queen stood on any issue, although she managed to sometimes leak it out. But they're supposed to be beyond or above politics. She would have a weekly, and King Charles has a weekly meeting with the Prime Minister. Um, uh, is called the audience. The Prime Minister has an audience with the monarch once a week to officially um, discuss, well, not even discuss, tell the monarch what the government is doing and intends to do.
So
Uh,
the prime minister leaves 10 Downing Street in a car, drives to
mhm,
Buckingham Palace or whatever,
that's correct.
and has a
Yeah.
conversation with the queen or the king about what? How do you people get anything done in this country? I mean, once a week for, the chief executive to drive to someone's
It's
house and
not
have tea?
far.
For God's
They live
sake.
they live just down the road from each other. It doesn't take long. They block off all the. It doesn't take long. He doesn't get stuck in traffic on the way. They block off all the streets, and
Can't
it's
he
from
just get on
home.
the phone or do a Zoom? I mean, this
It's
is 2026.
Well, it made a very nice play that Peter Morgan, who wrote The Crown, he wrote a play called The Audience about the Queen's meetings, really about her relationship with different prime ministers. Her first prime minister was Winston Churchill, so that gives us that gives some context to just how long her reign was. She became queen in 19 52 at the age of 25. She was young. And everyone said, she was a breath of fresh air, and it was the first female monarch in 52 years, and since Queen Victoria, and she was young, and she performed her job very well until I think the last few years, with some caveats, but they're big caveats, and the biggest one is her overindulgence of her favorite son, who unfortunately was Andrew. And he was the most troublesome child you could imagine. And I think she liked his sort of cheekiness. I think he reminded her in some ways of her husband, Philip. And he was a naughty lad, and he got into all sorts of trouble. And then trouble became an understatement, because when he got involved with Jeffrey Epstein, and he, from what we understand, has been charged with, we should give a legal caveat here, he denies that he had sex with a trafficked girl who later very tragically killed herself. He's got some alleged muck on his hands.
Well, you said he was a troublesome lad. I mean, was this from the start?
Yes.
He was in school? Would he put the girls' pigtails in the inkwell, or throw firecrackers into the principal's office?
He didn't go to school with girls. He went to an all-boys boarding school. He didn't see any, but he was nicknamed Randy Andy by
Oh,
the press.
sweet mother of God!
He was a womanizer from a very young age. He was better looking than his older brother Charles, the Prince of Wales, who always knew he was going to become king. So Andrew was the spare, and that's a loaded term now, because of course Prince Harry is the latest spare, and he's very bitter about it and wrote a big book called Spare, which was the fastest selling nonfiction book of all time. So Prince Andrew was the spare. Prince Andrew was a spare back in the 60s and 70s, and he's
sort of like vice president or something. Is that what you mean by spare?
Only in the sense that, yes, if the heir to the throne falls off a cliff, he becomes king, or he becomes next in line. But he doesn't even have the neutered, minor political power that the vice president has.
Well, so actually, this is an important question then. Harry's out, Andrew's out. Who's the backup?
For what?
Joe Rogan.
Well, there are many backups. Once the Prince
Who's
of Wales.
The spare?
The spare now is the king's son. Prince William will become king, and after William, his son, is next in line as the heir presumptive, I think it's called. By the way, if William's first child had been a girl, she would have been next in line, because they changed the law, so you wouldn't have to go through all the males in the family before you happened upon a Queen Victoria or a Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth became queen because the guy who was supposed to become king and briefly became king, Edward VIII, abdicated in 1936 so he could marry the woman he loved, a twice divorced American woman who was beyond child-rearing age. So he wouldn't have ever had any children. Didn't have any children.
And remind us of her name.
Wallace Simpson.
Wallace Simpson.
And so his neurotic, stuttering younger brother, who was the spare, George, became George VI, much to his chagrin. He never wanted to become king. Became addicted to smoking. He was a nervous, and he died of cancer in 1952. The Queen always blamed her uncle for that, for driving her beloved father into an early grave. So George, who was the Duke of York, who was the spare until 1936, only had two girls. He didn't have any sons. He had two girls, Elizabeth and Margaret, who didn't grow up expecting to become, directly in line to the throne. Elizabeth didn't find out she had become queen until she was 10. And once she was 10 years old, she was groomed, to use an unfortunate term, but she was groomed to become the next monarch after her father died, which she did.
And by the way, American listeners, if you did watch The Crown, or if you did not watch The Crown, everything JB's describing was they dramatized with, I would say, perfection, with some of the best actors in the business,
Yes.
especially Jared Harris as King George. Sort of extraordinary
Oh,
what he
Jared
can
Harris
do.
was great, but everyone, it was so well cast. I mean, they had the cream of the acting crop in the UK. And and I think Peter Morgan had a tricky job because it's a slightly ungainly history, but he did manage to dramatize those stories very well. I was until the final series, I was a big fan of it. I thought it went maybe too, when it got up to Diana, I thought it got a bit hacky and trashy and a bit silly. But that's my take. That's my Other people will have other views on it. So, what is my argument against the Queen, this beloved figure that I went to her funeral? I
I
I
have the
was.
photo.
There is a photo of me paying my respects to the Queen. It was all broadcast live on the BBC, and I
And
did it partly
it was
because
broadcast live, and someone in your household took a screenshot
yeah, my
of
my
you,
wife
where I
my
forget, were you
wife
on your knees with your hands clasped? Is that how it was?
I threw
Were you
myself on the
genuflecting?
chair weeping, and they had to pry me off. These four beepers and security and men in armor had to peel me off the casket. It was slightly embarrassing.
You knocked a bear hat off a beefeater, I think.
Yeah. I wasn't asked back. Yeah, I waited in queue. I waited in line for 8 hours. Luckily, it wasn't raining, but it was an interesting. It
You
was
waited
interesting
in line
experience.
8 hours. So everybody listening, that's credibility. Here's someone who waited in line 8 hours to pay respects to a deceased monarch, and now has an opinion,
Yeah, to
and
be
not
fair,
a positive.
I would have done the same for the Rolling Stones, maybe, but that wasn't on offer. So anyway, yes, yeah, I've always admired. I had always admired the Queen to some degree. My one constant caveat about my admiration for the royal family was this: they're almost total disinterest in the arts. That just seemed like a personal a problem I had with them. They just seemed. She was into horse racing. She was very into horses. That was her culture. She wasn't a reader. She wasn't a theater goer. I don't know what films she was into, but she was into horse racing as her mother was, and she liked to I think take a flutter. I think that was the term. Have a bet on things. Yeah, and she owned a lot of race horses.
And,
She liked riding.
you're reminding me, because my only knowledge is being in the grocery aisle and seeing the royals on the cover of People magazine and watching The Crown. But I see there's also she also was had a she attracted viewers because of what she wore. And I saw yesterday that there's a display of her clothes at Buckingham Palace. It's a fashion show of
Yes, the people.
sort of
I
like a
recently,
costume show or something like that.
yeah, people are interested in that. I recently went to a play that was about her relationship with her dressmaker. I mean, it's
Oh my God, it
all
doesn't end.
it never ends, all aspects. But actually, we're getting away from this key point of her
Yes, please.
besottedness, I mean, if that's the word, her indulgence of her bad son Andrew, and that left a real mess in its wake. One of a couple of messes she left. That was the biggest one. I assume he told his mother that it was all lies, that he hadn't done the terrible things that were being. Do you remember there was a broadcast in the states, the notorious BBC interview with him, that what's her name, Mateless, interviewed him,
I'm
Andrew.
sure there must have. I watched a dramatization, which was
Yeah.
excellent. It was,
Yes. Right.
sort of like a journalistic drama, which was excellent. But
Yeah. There
please
were
continue.
two versions of it. I mean, it was a car crash. He thought he could get over this scandal by answering questions about it, and it was showed his total lack of awareness. He never, he everyone knew he was good friends with Jeffrey Epstein. There were photographs of him walking in Central Park in New York with Epstein years after Epstein had been imprisoned for sexual. What was he imprisoned for? For trafficking, or I don't know. He was, but
Time
it
for the
was
second
known.
time. He
It
was in
was,
prison twice.
yeah, right. So, and I think Andrew had lied about how long his association went. He felt he said that he had to, instead of calling up Jeffrey and calling off with friendship, he felt he had to go to New York in person and stay with him for a few days because he was an honorable man, and to break off the friendship then, which it turns out it wasn't broken off. They still emailed each other after that, which we didn't even find out until after that interview. But the interview was a car crash, and Andrew expressed no contriteness or regret for any of the women that had been trafficked by Epstein. He just seemed so privileged, and it came
Help me
across.
put this in perspective then. You're criticizing Elizabeth as an unworthy monarch, someone who didn't do a good job for the British people. Is it all based on Andrew, who we've talked about already, or is there more?
Andrew and she, a lot of people wondered when and if she would step aside to let her son become king before he became an old geezer. And for whatever reason, she never did. And she may have felt it was about duty, and she could still do her job, but it didn't do her son any favors. And her son was going to become king, and by the time became king, not only was he in his 70s, but shortly thereafter he got cancer. He hasn't been in good health. Um, he hasn't had enough training directly on the job. She had 70 years to become, in her job, and he'll get, I don't know how many. But and even when his son takes over, his son won't be a particularly young man. So maybe she should have stepped aside sooner. And yeah, that she just didn't. I mean, I don't think you can overestimate the trouble Andrew has caused the the royal family. They have weathered a lot of scandals over the years, but this is the one that's
Well,
still happening.
you're reminding me. Charles had a scandal himself. He
What was
left his
that?
wife for someone.
Oh
He
yes,
he was
what's
cheated on
that?
Diana
Yes,
with
he
a
was
woman
an
named
adult.
Camilla. And what do
Yeah.
people think of Charles with that in hindsight? What do they think of Camilla?
Yes, that's a great question.
I know
And
it's a great question.
it is a good question. And at the time when that happened in the 1990s,
No
I'd
need to
even forgot
flatter
about
me,
it. You had to
Mildred.
remind me about in the 90s. Yes, he cheated on his wife with his lover, his mistress, whom he was going out with before he met Diana. He wanted to marry Camilla, and his parents wouldn't let him. All right, that was another
Mm.
mistake. That's on them. You know, they were the parents. They had four children: the king and the Duke of Edinburgh, her husband, and three of those marriages failed. And I'm not saying that's all the fault of the parents. Obviously, it's a fault of the marriages, the people in the marriages themselves. But that was a very dysfunctional family, and he should have been allowed to marry um, Camilla. She was married to someone else. I mean, she was waiting around. She was waiting around for him, and they thought she was, I guess, too racy or something. And they had her go on a vacation or holiday, or send him away. I can't remember. It's in the Crown. It's a Crown episode, and they broke up that relationship. And then he found Diana, who in retrospect was totally unsuited for that role. She was too young, she's too naive, she's too headstrong, and she didn't know what she was getting herself into. And she married someone who wasn't in love with her, who was in love with someone else, but that wasn't her fault. So that was a mess, and that's something that the also they sent Charles to the wrong school. They sent him to a brutal boarding school in Scotland, where his father had gone, and his father had liked it. His father was a completely different kind of character than he was. Charles is a more sensitive, soulful, quiet guy, and they put him in the. He was beaten up constantly by his fellow students at all boys boarding school, and he should have. He wanted to go to Eton, which is in Windsor, so it was a local school, and he would have been much closer to his mother and his family, and they wouldn't allow it. So that really scarred him, as it
That
scarred many.
that resonates with me, and it sort of makes the family more real, because isn't that a common parenting mistake, is thinking that your child is you, and that your child can do
or
everything that
or
you
you
did
want your
without
child to be
without
you.
knowing your child.
You want to make your child. Mold your child into a version of you, which Charles was never going to be. And I think for the record, the Queen wanted to allow Charles to go to Eton, and her husband overruled her, so to
Oh, you're
speak.
sticking up for the queen now. Okay.
But
All right.
just to be clear, but she should have overruled her husband. Should have insisted on it. She
She's the
was
monarch.
enthralled.
Yeah, you're right. She should have had him beheaded or something, or
She
put
was
in the dungeon.
enthralled to her husband. She was overindulgent to Andrew. I think she liked, cheeky. Uh, I mean, they're both womanizers, to be honest.
Mm.
So, she did not have. She was a better public figure than she was a private figure, and we're learning more about that since her death. That she left more of a mess than she should have done. I will stick up for her. There are some good things she did, and they were very good things. And one of the things she did was in 1961. So she had been on the throne for less than a decade. She had a royal visit, a state visit to Ghana, an African nation that had formerly been a colony and had become independent and had a black president. And and there was a threat of them leaving the Commonwealth, which was a loose association of former colonies that had a connection to the monarch. People will quibble with the details of that, but
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
right.
And
So and at the end of the visit, not only was she very, amenable and warm to the government there, but there was a dinner dance on her last evening, and this is all on film, and this is in the Crown as well. She danced with the black president of Ghana. Now, you think, oh well, of course she would. This was not. Think what was going on in America in 1961. This was this was in this during the civil rights movement, and there were still poll taxes. I mean, there was a lot of racial prejudices. There still is in the U.S., but I think it was a significant visual, if I can put it that way, of her dancing. It's a lovely. I've seen the film of it, and
can you maybe this is a good time for you to explain something to this crude Yankee Doodle me, a little bit about the Commonwealth, and I'm going to reflect on that. If you're an American, uh, I had an economics professor who was Jamaican, and he had pictures of the Queen on the wall. And I was recently at my mother visiting my 88-year-old mom at her independent living facility, and there was a woman from Trinidad there who took the afternoon off to see the Queen's funeral. Why do people from Jamaica and Trinidad and Ghana, why are they fascinated with the Queen, and what is their special relationship through, I believe, what is called the Commonwealth? Although
Yes.
my mother lives in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I don't think it's the
Yeah,
same
all right.
Commonwealth.
Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
It's the remnants of the British Empire. They lost India, I think, in 1948, um, but they have in some connection to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, some of the Caribbean islands. Um, Gibraltar, they have a reduced, a slimmed down. It's
Ghana.
not an empire; it's a Commonwealth. Ghana.
Yeah.
Oh no, they don't have. Yeah, well, they had. Sorry, I don't know the details of the Commonwealth, but they, it speaks well of the Queen that her Commonwealth, um, the people of color in the Commonwealth, do have respect for, because she had no racial prejudice or that could be detected. Something that and she probably knew a lot of people who were racist in the aristocracy. And so I think that speaks well of her. I think she made people feel comfortable. I once read the definition of a gentleman, and this could go for a gentlewoman as well, is someone who is comfortable with all types of people, and all people are comfortable with them. So there's no sort of haughtiness. And I think she who was always in the public eye, I think she felt she was comfortable speaking to anyone. People tend to be pretty nice to her. And she had pretty nice travel arrangements, and she got to eat pretty well. She had very good medical coverage, as a lot of Brits do. Most Brits, all Brits
Right.
do.
That's another topic.
Yeah.
So given her legacy, maybe it's a study in contrast here. What do the British people, how do they remember her, and what is their attitude towards their new regent, or sorry, monarch?
Yes. Well, I think there's a lot more love for Charles than you would have predicted 20 or 30 years ago. I think his stock was probably at its lowest, maybe when Diana died. And remember, there's a whole film called The Queen, also by Peter Morgan, who wrote The Crown, which is about how when Princess Diana died, the Queen wouldn't budge from Balmoral, her neo-Gothic sprawl in Scotland, her favorite house, partly because it's so far away from the public eye. And it took her something like, I think, 5 days to get her butt off the sofa and come down and pay some kind of respects to
How dare you speak
the
that way?
memory.
And what was their relationship like? What was Diana's relationship? Was it a typical mother-in-law relationship?
Yes, it was a bad relationship.
Okay.
If that's a typical, I always had a good relationship with my late mother-in-law, but
Me too.
it was,
For the
yeah,
record.
for the
I hope
record,
my
the
wife's listening.
exceptions to the rule. She had a bad relationship with the Queen. Most members of the royal family felt that Diana was embarrassing the family, and was assisting in tell-all books and conducting interviews, which were very revealing really private things that they didn't want to be publicly aired. And she was going about with this playboy, this Egyptian playboy, the son of a billionaire, Dodi El
Fayed.
Fayed, who's, by the way, whose father owned Harrods, the department store, and who, after he died, because his son died in the car crash with Diana, after the father died, it turned out he had been raping a lot of the female staff at Harrods and in his organization. He was not a good. He gets off very lightly in The Crown. I think if Peter Morgan knew more about that story, he wouldn't have written the episode that came out. That was quite.
You just used the R word. Is that really what it was?
I believe so. Certainly.
That's a pretty
Sexual
extreme.
predator. Yeah.
We tend to soften it by calling it sexual harassment, or
Well, it wasn't harassment.
a term I learned recently, sex pest. But please continue.
No, I mean, no, I think that underscores that he was a sexual predator. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's more accurate than a sex pest. Sounds like he's like a
like me.
Wasp.
Just kidding.
Anyway, the point is Diana was embarrassing the royal family, and she was. I thought it was appalling the way she died. I thought it was embarrassing. What the hell was she doing with this very underwhelming Richie Rich son? A nepo baby who was wooing her, whose father desperately wanted his son to marry the former Princess of Wales. Um, and she was away from her family. She was in a speeding car with a drunk driver and a useless um, you know security protection. Anyway, it was a mess. It was a
No,
mess.
there's a theme. There's a theme here of bad parenting between the Queen and Andrew, and Charles being sent to the wrong school, and Dodie, um,
Yeah, there's a lot of bad.
the
Yeah,
father encouraging Dodie to marry and woo Diana. It's like some
yeah.
bad parenting, probably
Bad
issues.
parenting. Yes, Dodi El Fayed was engaged to another woman when he was romancing
Okay,
Diana.
scandal. Yeah.
An American model, I think. Anyway, so yeah, a lot of that's well pointed out. That's a good theme here. Is bad parenting. Um, but she was. Um, it's difficult to overestimate or explain how ubiquitous and important a character she was if you grew up in England. She was in all the banknotes, she was in all the coins. Until recently, there's been no living person on an American coin or currency. I think, isn't Trump on a quarter or something? I don't know. He insisted on his
More than that, I mean, back to the topic of the
postage stamp.
Commonwealth. Her, she was her portrait was on the currency of countries all over the world. She
Yeah.
is
Yes, that's a
a global sensation.
Yes, it was a big thing when they took it off the Australian currency and maybe off the Canadian currency too. There was finally a break there. But yes, you couldn't imagine. She didn't seem quite real. And I remember as a kid trying to picture her going to the loo, sitting on a toilet. It didn't just because she seemed like she was sort of celestial or sort of goddess like. She didn't seem like a real person. I don't know
Yeah.
if I thought of that that Bob Dylan line from "It Ain't Me, Babe." Sometimes even the president of the United States has to stand naked. That's a great line. 1964. The president would have been Lyndon Johnson. I could always picture him naked for some reason. This big flabby guy, but I couldn't picture the Queen sitting on the loo. I don't know what that means. Probably says more about me than anyone else. But she was, this sort of spectral figure almost. And I had seen her a couple times. I remember waiting outside Buckingham Palace in 1972 to see the full crop of royal family in a carriage on their way to an event. I think it was the Queen's silver wedding anniversary or something, and it was a family event. So yeah, I was some kind of young royalist, and I've always been slightly more supportive of Charles than a lot of other people have, because he's always been in the vanguard of concern for environmental matters. He has an organic farm. He was into organic farming way before that became um, fashionable, and maybe people used to laugh at him for saying once he said he talked to plants. That became a bit of a thing. But
So how would you, just to go back to our topic, how would you grade if you were to give a letter grade to the Queen? And again, maybe just keep in mind the contrast with Charles. Well, how would you grade her her rule, for lack of a better word?
all right, well, this is when I'm totally unmasked as an anti-monarchist, because I would give her a pretty high grade over 70 years. I think she left a mess, and that was a problem. But I would give her maybe an A minus, B plus, A minus.
A little like Biden, a little like Joe Biden, left a mess
Oh, I thought you were going
by
to
not
say A minus
retreating
for
the.
Biden. Yes, Biden left a terrible mess, and The lack of self-awareness. I think, she was in her mid-90s, and maybe you lose your sense of perspective at that age. No monarch had lived to that age. No monarch had had such a long reign. I think the longest reign before her was um, either Queen Victoria or King George III. And remember, King George III went mad when he was still on the throne, so that didn't help.
King George III. This is circa the 18th century. Am I right?
18th century, he was king from 1760 to 1820, so 60 years.
60 years.
But his son was the Prince Regent for maybe 10 of those years, because
Meaning
the
what?
king was meaning that the king was incapacitated and couldn't reign because he was mad. So the son essentially was the ruler. He's called the Prince Regent. That's where we get the regency period from, and he was a great cultural figure, but not a good personal figure. And maybe you could say similar thing for the Queen. I would have liked it if the Queen had encouraged the arts a bit more. She did give the Beatles MBEs, which is a ceremonial title.
What does that stand for?
The commander of the British Empire. They're like little medals they could wear, and they would put MBE after their names. John Lennon gave his back in a fitted peak after Cold Turkey didn't reach #1 in the charts or something. I don't know. But anyway, she got to meet the Beatles. I always thought that was cool. I would have liked that. But she was, if you go back to Edward VII, 1901 to 1910, he was King Edward VII, was friends with Oscar Wilde and George Bernard Shaw and Whistler. He was a real cultured guy. So I was always hoping.
Was. Wow.
Oh,
Impressive.
It was impressive. He was a womanizer as well, but I always thought we could have, used a bit more. Think if you're a king or queen of England, you can get tickets to anything, and no one gives you a hard time, and they're great seats, So, but she didn't use, none of them used that great trick they have.
It's too bad she did. She dame any of the Spice Girls? What's her relationship with the Spice Girls? Or
it's pretty spicy, I think. Britpop, yeah, 1990s. No, I don't think she had much. I think the Spice Girls may have performed at one of the royal events. I don't know. It was quite controversial when one of the Gallaghers, Noel Gallagher, met Tony Blair. Noel Gallagher of Oasis met Tony Blair, and that didn't go down well in the rock world. They thought it shouldn't have been hanging out with, lending his aura to a political figure.
It's a little bit bougie for rock and roll.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Le mot juste, as usual, from Jim Jalamis. Bougie. That's what it was. It was bougie. She wasn't. The Queen was not bougie, and one of the things people liked about her was she could trace her work experience back to the Second World War, where she was a member of she was in a support group for a tank corps. She drove a vehicle and could change a spark plug, could fix an engine. This is when she would have been quite young. She would have been a teenager.
Why didn't we get to this earlier? She did what? Was she wearing overalls?
She was wearing khaki. She's wearing a khaki uniform. I think she liked to talk about that for years later. She'd boast about how she could, I'm engine.
I'm impressed.
Good driver.
This should have been the first thing you said. She's a sweet mother. Americans like ingenuity.
We'll do this in the edit. We'll put this all up front. No, she was. She could have, if she'd been forced out, she probably could have gotten a job at a garage somewhere fixing things. Yeah, certainly vintage vehicles. She was a good rider. Boy, she could ride a horse. So there were good things about her. I just wish she hadn't left such a mess. I mean, it's no small thing that 45% of the royal family is 45%. I think that seems a bit overstated to me.
That's 45% approval.
What? No, 45%. Yes, 45% approval. That's low. I think it's probably higher than that. But that was at the height of the Andrews. That's how much damage the Andrews scandal has done to the family.
Here's something appropriate to our podcast is whether there are certain generations who are endeared to the crown versus other generations. You have a sense of that at all?
Yes, I would say the older that you are, the more enamored of the crown you are. I think I
Okay.
think it is an age thing. I think the younger you are, because young people
So
feel
that's
that.
it, is it? Not very
Well, I mean,
nuanced, is it?
well, yeah, I don't think it's very nuanced because young people don't see themselves reflected in King Charles. I think they
I,
like Prince
I feel like I'm
William.
having this Monty Python conversation where he interviews a paleontologist and she describes a brontosaurus as having a very thin head and then a long neck and then very wide and then very thin at the end.
Yeah,
And
well,
he
I was
says,
going
"That's it, is
Creed.
it? That's your theory?" And she says, "Yes, it is."
That Steve belongs
Please
to me.
continue.
Yes, yeah, that's my theory. Yeah, no, but I think that that makes sense, doesn't it? I think not that Prince William is, Prince William is now in his early 40s. He's not, he was very popular in his 20s amongst young people. Maybe his son, Doogie, whatever his name is, Biff, Happy, Biffy, Prince
Pee
Biffy, maybe Prince
Pee Wee.
Biffy, Prince Pee
What's his
Wee,
last name? Actually, what is his last name? What is his on his passport? What would his last name be?
Windsor. Windsor. The
Pee
last
Wee
name's
Windsor.
Windsor.
All right.
Yeah, Biffy Windsor. Maybe he'll grow up to be a heartthrob and a polo player and whatever popular.
Which one dressed at a costume party in an SS uniform? Which one was that?
That would be Harry of the
Not
Spare book. The books there, yes, that would be
not a
the.
good look, Harry. And may I throw in the I hate giving credit to the New York Post, but the headline was one of those extraordinary New York Post headlines. Ready for it?
Headless body found in topless bar. No.
Better than that.
What was it?
It was a photo of Harry at the party in costume. The headline was
Nazi costume. Nazi
yeah,
costume.
yeah. Der
What was the
Führer.
headline?
Der
Yeah,
Führer. Furor.
the Fuhrer. That's good. That was a Fuhrer. Yes. Well done, New York Post.
Yeah, well done, New York Post, but for the record, they suck. Please continue.
The nuisance known as Andrew used to be the nuisance known as Harry. Although the nuisance known as Harry is still a nuisance. He's still causing havoc. We haven't talked about Harry much, but he's another problem.
And
And
he's
that
fully resigned, right? He's no longer.
he wants his way back in. They keep pulling me back in. He wants back into the family. I think he wants to move back to England and get a job as a royal again. That's the word. That's what my sources are telling me, Jim.
It's kind of a complex topic, maybe reserved for another podcast, because then there's the Markle family and
Yeah, the
the
Meghan.
underlying racism
Oh,
among the
Harry and
royals and royal
Meghan.
hangers on,
We should do a
and their
whole.
opportunism and their book contracts and their TV contracts. It's a lot to talk
Yes.
about there and
Yeah,
unpack.
that's for another day. I used to be very, very supportive of Harry and Meghan, but I've changed my views slightly on that. So for another pod. But that's bad parenting, I think. You know,
Well, there's that.
that's the
Boom.
theme of today's show is royally bad parenting.
Boomers, Gen Xers, millennials who are parents, keep this in mind. If you
Take
get
note.
anything from this podcast, don't be narcissistic with your children. It will destroy them
Don't
and
send
destroy
your
your
children
legacy.
to mean boarding schools in cold Scotland where they'll be pummeled and won't be given heat in the winter, and just don't do it. Unless they beg you to send them there, in which case, sure, why not?
Yep.
So Um, I think that's a good assessment. Um, do you want to go to headquakes?
Let's go to headquakes. And I was prepared to talk about Hunter S. Thompson and
Oh,
how I'd read some of his early journalism where he
mm.
was really strictly using the conventions
On
of
the campaign
reporting.
trail, 72.
Even
Is that right?
before that, when
Mm.
he was a correspondent for the National Observer, which was a weekly edition from Dow Jones, notably of the Wall Street Journal. He was stationed in
Wow.
Brazil and other places, and
Yeah.
he wrote using referring to himself in the third person. This reporter heard about the chaos at a nightclub in downtown Copacabana,
Can I
and
just ask, was that the style that was dictated by the journal, or had he developed that style himself?
it was a convention of journalism to
Right.
be strictly non subjective. So instead
Right.
of
What did
saying
he?
I
Yeah.
ran to the Copacabana, this journalist went to the Copacabana.
Right.
That's in existence today at the Economist. This
Because he didn't.
correspondent
The reporter was not supposed to be part of the story. He or she was supposed to be just reporting the story. Right.
just there wasn't even supposed to be a person there. It was supposed to be
Just a
fully
fax man.
objective, and it's kind of beautiful in a way to see how he had mastered that form, because he would eventually turn it inside out with gonzo journalism to
Yeah.
say
Don't.
objectivity is a joke or a rumor.
You can't
Um,
break the rules until you know what they are. He knew the rules, and then he could break them. Is that sort of
yeah.
what you're saying?
So I said that was going to be my head quake,
Oh well,
but
that's not
my
even your head quake. Why are you wasting
not
us?
even my head quake, because I don't have much to say about this. But today is April 26th. Last night was the White House Correspondents Dinner, which broke into chaos with a still undefined shooter causing havoc. And it's just a reminder, if you look at some of the footage of journalists and guests scrambling under tables and people being dragged off of stages, isn't it kind of emblematic, to use a weird word? What does emblematic even mean? Tell me later. Of really what this whole presidency is about is
Yeah, it's so
chaos and
chaotic.
lack of control.
Pure chaos, just randomness, chaos. I think that's right. That's a good. Yes, if you just look at the photographs that have been in, they're indistinct. They're just not clear what was going on, and it's not clear what's going on from the White House. Nothing seems clear.
We can't have nice things here, to quote
No,
someone near
unfortunately.
and dear to me. We can't have nice things in the United States. We
Well,
can't even have dignity or accountability. But
well,
that's a whole
I,
other topic.
on a brighter note, my headquake is a BBC series called W1A, which is on the BBC here and on the BritBox in the US. So you have access to it in the US if you subscribe to BritBox, and it is hilarious, a very funny series, which is about the BBC. It's made by the BBC, but it's set at the BBC New Broadcasting House, which is one of my favorite buildings in London, and you see a lot of it in the series. And it's sort of about corporate speak. It's about Hugh Bonville, whom people remember from. Um,
Oh, this is an
what's
old show, isn't it?
yes, it's an old show. Hugh Bonville was in that country. What was that series called?
That country show, that
Downton
rural
Abbey.
program, Downton Abbey. Yes,
Downton Abbey. He's the butler, I think. But anyway, Hugh Bonneville is very funny, and he
he's
plays
not
the
the butler. He's not the
oh,
butler.
isn't he? Oh no, you're
No,
right. He's Lord
he's the
Granville.
master of the
He's
house.
a master. I get butlers and masters mixed up. Yes, no,
Just
quite right. Thank you
just
for
to
the correction.
antagonize our listeners, probably one of the
Yes,
worst shows ever
it
made.
was
But please continue.
Sir Mr. Granville, Lord Granville. Yeah, quite right. But that's what most people know him from. He's very funny. He plays the head of values, which is an absolutely meaningless title, and he holds these meetings with someone who's the head of corporate governance or the head of going forward or and so you could apply their situation just about any sort of. Well, you've worked, Jim, you've probably had more experience in these kind of meetings than I have, but it's just absolutely hilarious, the dealing with the various scandals they're trying to deal with that concern the BBC itself. W1A is the postcode broadcasting house.
Gotcha. That accounts for
And
the
they did an
title.
earlier series called 2012, which was about the lead up to the London Olympics, and where everything was going wrong. And they've just come out with just recently came out with a series called 2026, which is about preparing the U.S. for the World Cup. And so they're making fun of
The
FIFA.
UK. Oh, the US for the World Cup.
It's in the
That's right.
U.S. Hugh
Of course,
Bonneville
yes.
flies to Florida and heads up
No.
head of values in the FIFA, though they're not allowed to use the word FIFA. So every time someone says World Cup or FIFA, it's beeped out. And it's very funny. So they've been talking about the 2026 burp. Well, I think we have problems with the burp because FIFA would sue the daylights out of them. But anyway, the great series I like is W1A, made by the BBC and making fun of itself. I can't think of any equivalents except when sometimes the Saturday Night Live used to make fun of NBC, and Stephen Colbert sometimes takes a poke at CBS. But this is a whole series that makes fun of its own network. So kudos.
You know what sounds delicious to me is seeing Hugh Bonneville in Florida and the BBC's take on Florida culture.
Well, that's called 2026. I don't know. That might be on the BritBox as well. So check that out. So we have absolute chaos. Jim is pointing out chaos in the White House, and I'm pointing out comedy in the BBC. See, that's the
And
kind of counter programming.
So we conclude. May I
Why
conclude?
not? Yeah.
And that is Boomer Has It. I'm Jim Jalamis in Brooklyn at the Fiction Cafe.
Oh, what's it called? The Fiction Cafe?
I'm in a cafe called Fiction. How appropriate for us.
In Williamsburg.
In Williamsburg.
And I'm in my flat.
That's why you hear the throat clearing sounds of the espresso machine and ambient music.
Well, I think the sound was pretty good. Well, kudos to you in Fiction, and I'm in my flat in London. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Bye.
See you next time.